And as we were singing today about how we fight our battles, you see on the slide there, I named this sermon, The Biblical Art of Lament, Our Weapon to Face a Broken World. This is one of the weapons we have to fight our battles. It's nothing like what the world would tell us to do. But the truth is, as we reveal the fullness of what we're experiencing to God, we allow Him to bring the fullness of His healing in us and through us. Every bit that we block off trying to protect ourselves from God is a part of ourselves we protect from His healing. The art of lament is about letting it all go to God. And if we can pick up this weapon and realize the power we have in our hearts and in our hands, we will be powerful in the midst of brokenness. Sorry, now I have to figure out where I'm going. So, let's start by remembering where we came from. You probably remember that Job was not having a very good time. He lost his family, his wealth, his health. His wife was not happy. That might have been the worst. I mean, it's just tough. I love you, Steph. That was just chapters 1 and 2. He was suffering. Fortunately, for a time, he had friends who came and sat with him for a week. And I mean, I know we're quick to look at his friends, and we'll have plenty of time to see how pathetic they were. But they sat with him for a week. So, I mean, I would have opened my yap a lot sooner than that. And they seemed like good friends. But unfortunately, once Job started crying out to God in chapter 3, their response was not entirely helpful. In chapters 4 and 5, friend number 1, Eliphaz, kind of is helpful and points Job to God, but also starts building up this broken image of God, that if you do good, you won't experience trouble. And so if you're experiencing trouble, you probably did something wrong. And as Tracy shared last week, that's just not the case. We got to break that image of God. Yeah. So this week, as we look at Job's response to his friends, I want to remind us of chapter 3. It's like a parallel. You know, Job is crying out for the first time, and now he's crying out again. And you see a lot of similarities. And so I want to bring back up what Stuart and Corey preached 2 weeks ago about chapter 3. Stuart focused on the broken image of God, which tells us that God is not with us in suffering. The good news is that through Christ, we know the opposite to be true. We see how much God comes to be right with us, as close as our breath, if we let Him. Corey looked at how many of us believe the lie that we cannot show the depth of our pain, our hurt, our doubts, because we think that if we're open with God, we'll reveal a lack of faith. It'll lead to some sort of punishment. God will abandon us. The good news here is that God can handle the pain we feel. And when we allow God access to the deepest, darkest places of our lives, our emotions, our experiences, that allows His healing to occur that otherwise would have been closed off. So that's the background. And you can see up there where we've been and the broken images. We call this series The Broken Images of God. That's what we've seen so far. So now we're here in chapters 6 and 7. We get back into this back and forth, which is going to be most of the rest of the book of Job. His friends saying something, being angry, Job getting frustrated, being angry. They're going back and forth. Job is going to respond to Eliphaz and continue in his complaint. We have 2 chapters to cover, and I encourage you to read them as you have time this week. But I wanted to highlight some of the main ideas. 1, I'm miserable and I'm about to die. 2, God has shot and poisoned me. I want to die. I have no hope. My friends have left me. I'm open to correction, but show me what I did wrong, because I sure don't know what it was. And God is always judging me, and it's a huge burden because God is so strict. Have you ever felt some of these things? This is the real gift of the book of Job. It shows people like us. It shows people suffering like we suffer, feeling like we feel, and it gives us a framework to respond to the reality of a broken world. So before we go any further, let's look a little bit deeper into the content of what Job is saying and whether it reflects truth about God or not. As Corey mentioned, God doesn't come and critique our theology when we cry out to him. And I want you to hear me when I say, you don't need to worry about saying exactly the right thing to God. However, we're reading this as outsiders, and we don't want to take Job's word as God's truth, right? So we're not saying Job shouldn't have said this, and you have to have everything lined up before you can cry out to God. But we are saying, when we look at what he's saying, we shouldn't just take it all and say, oh yeah, well that's true. God did shoot and poison him. He has no hope, and God's pretty terrible. So, sorry, God. Right? We need to look at what we know about God and put it over what Job is saying to understand the truth here. So let's look at number 1. God has shot and poisoned me. Essentially, Job's framework for understanding reality is that God controls all things. I am suffering, so therefore God made me suffer. In short, if I'm suffering, God did it to me. And it was probably because of something I did wrong. God not only committed violence against me, but has caused terror to fill my heart. That's what Job is saying. Is that an accurate picture of our God? Well, I think sometimes we're tempted to believe so. God is surely capable of destroying our life. He's capable of creating and destroying. But when we look at Christ, our clearest picture of God, you see something different. Think about Luke 13, for example. Jesus is asked about talks about 2 specific situations where people suffer. And he kind of laughs at the idea that they were more sinful or less holy than anyone else. One is about a tower falling on people. He said, they weren't any worse than anyone else. And then another one in John 9, someone asks him, what about this man who was born blind? Who sinned? Was it him or was it his parents? And Jesus says, you don't get it. That's not how it works. It was neither of them. And so we need to learn these same lessons that Christ is trying to teach. God is capable of punishing us for our sin, but that does not mean that every time we suffer, we are being punished for our sins. Let me say that again. God can punish us for our sin, but that doesn't mean every time we're suffering, it's because of our sin. And I think we sometimes get that all mixed up and, confused in our head. And we go back to the same refrain that Job is saying. I'm suffering. I must be unholy. So let me do some good things to undo this suffering. Assuming our suffering is caused by God is a broken image of God. And it's just as prevalent today as it was in Job's time. We know God cares for humanity. He loves us. We know that God wants us to have life in the full. And we know that suffering comes for many reasons. Suffering can come from the sin of others. It can come from evil working in our world. It can come from the ongoing working out of the fall. To assume the amount of suffering we face is directly linked to how holy or sinful we are is a mistake. And that's a misunderstanding of God. So that's number one. Number two, God's presence is a burden to me. Let's look at the end of chapter 7 and what Job says. He says, "What is mankind that you make so much of them? That you give them so much attention, that you examine them every morning and test them every moment? Will you never look away from me or let me alone even for an instant? If I have sinned, what have I done to you? You who see everything we do, why have you made me your target? Have I become a burden to you? Why do you not pardon my offenses and forgive my sins? For soon I will lie down in the dust, and you will search for me, and I'll be no more." This is Job speaking to God. Based on this thinking, Job says, "Why are you so hard on me, God? Essentially, I don't know what I did wrong. I'm sure you're right, but this seems unfair. Can't you be kind and forgive me? Can't you stop watching me, waiting for me to fail?" This is another broken image of God. The God who is always watching with furrowed brow, the God of disappointment, shame, and unrelenting critique. His presence is a burden, and he is angry. But let us look back at what we know of who God is. Did Christ operate like this? Does God's presence come in that way among us now? I can testify that when I feel God's presence here, like we did today, it didn't feel anything like that. It didn't feel anything like, I'm waiting for you to screw up. I'm waiting for you to move your arm the wrong way, to dance the wrong way, to say, that wasn't here. God's presence brings freedom. He revels in our worship of him. And so if we have this picture in our mind of God, the schoolmaster with the ruler ready to slap us across the face, we got to remove that. We got to recognize that that is a broken image of who our God is, and let Christ replace it with who he is. So once we strip away these broken images of God, the important thing that I want you to grasp onto from what Job is saying is the art of lament. Lament is a crucial weapon for God's people as we experience the broken world. We will inevitably experience suffering. Sorry if you didn't know that. There's the news flash. Spoiler alert. I mean, Tracy will tell you, I probably have suffered the least of any person in of all history. And even I can admit, we experience suffering. I experience suffering in my life. And we need to know how to handle it. We need to know how to find God, find the river of his life in the midst of it. Or else we'll be quickly consumed by it. The world will tell us that when we suffer, we should fight, we should get angry, we should use violence, causing suffering in equal proportion to the suffering we've experienced. It tells us to hide pain, to numb pain, to swallow pain, to fight through pain. But what are we called to? I believe it's the art of lament. Through lament, we acknowledge and experience our pain, and we give that to God. We do that in front of our God, and in lament, we release that pain into God's hands. In lament, we remind ourselves that God is present and good in the midst of our pain. And through lament, we can begin to move to a place of new beginnings, of healing, of forgiveness, and of joy. So what is this lament that we're talking about? A lament is a passionate expression of grief or sorrow. It's taking what we feel, all of it, in response to the broken world and express it in its fullness. For us as believers, it's combining the two truths preached the other week. One, that God is with me and ready to hear what I say, and two, that God can handle the full extent of my pain. Therefore, if God can handle all my pain, and God is close to us in suffering, then expressing the fullness of our grief to God is what we should be doing to respond to brokenness. Let me say that again. If God can handle all our pain, and He is right here with us, why don't we share it with Him? So that we can experience the healing and the release that He offers. The Bible is full of lament. There's a book that's named after lament. I don't know if you got Lamentations. It's lamentations. And laments are the most common kind of psalm. There's 67 psalms that are seen as laments. God is showing us through this biblical model how to respond to the pain we inevitably face. I think sometimes we think that crying out, it doesn't feel natural to me. I need to hold myself together. You know, it feels embarrassing. Maybe it feels inappropriate. But the Bible is showing us that this is a way to finding the peace that we need. So, how do we do this? Laments can include a number of different pieces, and I want to just share a few of them as a prompt, as a starter, as a way for you to start grabbing what your lament can look like as you cry out to God. It can include an address to God. Oh God, you're set. God, what is happening? You see often in the Psalms, there's just an opening of like, what is going on? God, it's you and me here. Let's talk. It can include a review of God's faithfulness. Reminding yourself, God, I know what you have done in my life. I remember on March 23rd, 2007, what you did for me. I remember that day, that time, that moment where you were real, where I could feel and acknowledge with all that I was that you were good and you were there with me. It reminds us that there's more than just this moment. There's more of God than what we're feeling right here. And it's setting the stage for us to see God in the midst of what's happening. It can and almost always includes a complaint. This is the best part. I think sometimes we feel like, oh, you know, it's not holy to complain to God. No, I mean, the Bible is full of complaining. And so, you know, let it loose. Let it rip, people. You know, like, man, what is happening here? You know, I see this. I see that. I'm feeling this. This guy's doing this to me. What's the deal? Why? It's okay. God can handle it. Right? He's not going to shirk back and be like, oh, I don't know. You know, I'm sorry. You know, like I think sometimes we think God is like us where, you know, if we ask, hey, how are you feeling? And suddenly they let loose. We're like, okay, well, I was going for okay or good, and that was the extent of what I was looking for. And we think God has about the same amount of bandwidth for our emotion. He can take it all, you know, so complain. But I think what the Bible shows us about lament is that there's more than just the complaint. We can surround it with these other elements. We can confess. Sometimes we know in our heart there is a place where we need to confess. And what I really appreciate about Job is that I feel like, at least to some extent, he's open. He wants to see, he's like, God, if there's something, let me see it. I don't know what it is. But if I've been wronging people, if I've been going the wrong path, show me. And I think that should be our attitude too. But we don't need to live under this cloud of guilt. If we feel like, I'm innocent here, I didn't ask for cancer, I didn't ask to be rear-ended and be in a neck brace for 6 months, I didn't ask for our country to, well, I'm not even going to go there. Okay, no, you can be open with God. No, not always open in front of everybody. There's some wisdom there. Okay, you can ask for help. You know, I think this is another thing. God is ready to help us. Ask him for it. You know, we heard from Dana. Ask him. I don't know how I'm going to find the builder of my house. I don't know how I'm going to pay for the stupid walls rotting. That's crazy. Who does that? But help me, God. And he's ready to help. And sometimes in lament, you'll see a response from God. And I think this is important. Give him some space. Let him speak. Hear what he's saying. You know, when we're open with him, I feel like there's a closeness that we're allowing him so close that if we just kind of plow through and don't listen, we miss what he might be whispering to us. And if you're writing this or recording it or praying it, you know, listen, write it down, hear what God is saying. And then finally, it can include a vow of praise and trust in God. And you see this in David over and over again in the Psalms. I mean, it's something I find so beautiful about the Psalms. Is at the end, he almost always ends with, you know, God, I know you're here. God, I remember you, and I will trust you. And even though all of this junk is weighing me down, and I can't even see beyond it, I know you. I worship you. Now, this is how we fight our battles. We are fully open with God to allow him to come in, and we remind ourselves of what he's doing. We listen to what he's saying. We confess our brokenness, and we come for help. So, I just wanted to look at one lament that we see in the Bible as kind of an example of what this looks like. And I kind of put some of the pieces that I mentioned right next to the text. This is Psalm 6. Lord, do not rebuke me in your anger or discipline me in your wrath. Have mercy on me, Lord, for I am faint. Heal me, Lord, for my bones are in agony. My soul is in deep anguish. How long, Lord? How long? Turn, Lord, and deliver me. Save me because of your unfailing love. Among the dead, no one proclaims your name. Who praises you from the grave? I am worn out from my groaning. All night long I flood my bed with weeping and drench my couch with tears. My eyes grow weak with sorrow. They fail because of all my foes. Away with me, all you who do evil, for the Lord has heard my weeping. The Lord has heard my cry for mercy, and the Lord accepts my prayer. All my enemies will be overwhelmed with shame and anguish. They will turn back and suddenly be put to shame. David is in agony. He is worn out. He feels like dying. And from his story, we know he faced some pretty tough situations. But he closes by reminding himself that God cares, God hears, God remembers. Now, I want to be careful here to encourage you again, not to feel like there's only one right way to lament. None of us have a perfect view of God. But we are still called to lament in the midst of our own broken images. And the Bible shows us that God is faithful to respond to us. My hope for you today is that you can take these elements, these pieces, and start building your own laments into the rhythms of your lives. I want to have two people come up and share a lament they have written to kind of get a sense, a feel of what this might sound like today. So first I'd like to call up Gretchen.
So I just want to apologize in advance. This is a very specific lament for very specific issues, so anybody who can't relate to it, sorry, but it's 90 seconds out of your life, so. Okay. Lord, why does every day only have 24 hours? It's just enough time for an idea to flower, only to fall with the night. Undone, unsung, because tomorrow is another one, and I have no time to finish what I've begun. Places to go, projects to complete, things to learn. But in this world, we only have what we earn, so most of the day is just functional. Rise up, brush teeth, be punctual, cook and clean, and then the phone rings, and there goes another day. A million little things that add up to one big zero. You prepared good works for us to walk in. Life's not chance. Sorry, Richard Dawkins. So why do I feel pulled in all directions? Like a planet with two suns. Like a dog with 4 leashes. Like a pin with 17 magnets. There's not even a connection between the items on the endless list, so I can't even get the gist of my day. But at the end, I always say, well, that went fast, and I didn't do everything I wanted to do. God, I know you have an answer, but I don't know what it is.
I'd like to call up Sam Tatum.
So, funny enough, this is polar opposite of that. This is a much more large-scale kind of thing. So, in my flesh, I seek answers. Explain why, God. Why you'd rather do nothing. Why you'd rather be silent, God. When I'm told I need to pray constantly, you decide to shut your mouth. Why you'd rather choose nothing, God. When I am doing all I can to keep faith, to help others, you decide inaction is best. Inaction seems counterintuitive for you who is all-knowing, all-powerful, and in all places. Genocides, typhoons, murderers, starvation, my own anxiety, preventable if you are who we believe you to be. What is just and good in this? Why silence? Why nothing? In my flesh, these are the answers I seek. I wish to know, for knowing why and being right is more important to me than knowing him. But that is in my flesh. In the spirit he has given me, I don't seek answers. I seek him. Sometimes it takes only one reminder from the Lord. He is not silent, but he speaks in the Spirit, and he has spoken to us by his Son. I don't seek answers because I don't need to know why. For the Lord simply says, seek me. And his Son promised that if you seek, you will find. And he has seen every suffering. He knows every broken heart, and he does have the power to heal. As a man, he firsthand saw the pain of loss. He saw the weight of the sins of the world, and he bore all of it on the cross. So forgive my doubt in you, O God, that has run rampant in my heart. Forgive me, Lord, for thinking I know what it takes to make this world right, when that is a job only fit for a king. And that king, Jesus, is still on his throne. And no doubt of mine will ever take him off of heaven's mercy seat.
I hope what you can see there is not that you have to be a great writer like these two to lament, but that through the process, you can find God. By opening up the fullness of what you're feeling to God, you have a weapon to respond to the hurt that is real. So, now it's your turn. I'd like to take a few minutes, and I know, we all have places to go, but I want to take a few minutes and end up with a time to pray the lament that's in your heart. I'm going to have Joni come up and play for us, but I want you to write or pray silently a lament for yourself, for your family, for our nation. There's plenty of brokenness to go around. Take this time now to come to God and practice lamenting to Him. Putting up those pieces again for you to think about. As always, the altar is open. And I'll come back in a few minutes to start into communion. So I encourage you to continue thinking and praying and revealing yourself to God. if you've started something, go home and finish it. And I encourage you to make this art part of your life, part of a way for you to survive what's out there and know God's goodness in the midst of it. And as we transition to communion, we remember Christ calling out to his Father, "Why have you abandoned me?" It's okay to feel like that. But we know that at the other end of the tomb is new life. That the stone will be rolled away and we'll live again. I'd like to call up the servers for communion today. Christ was betrayed, he took bread. When he had given thanks, he broke it and said, "This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In the same way, after supper, he took the cup, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this whenever you drink it in remembrance of me. For whenever you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes."